The Company of Pike. Each infantry regiment during the British Civil Wars consisted of two sorts of soldiers: the musketeers, armed with the matchlock or flintlock musket, and the pikemen. Many writers of this period, and indeed the pikemen themselves, consider them to be the superior arm, certainly the one that was older and more traditional, having classical origins going back all the way to ancient Greece. They often referred to the pike as the queen of the battlefield, and the men who carried them as the gentlemen of the pike. These men would be formed into a dense body in the centre of every infantry regiment for protection against enemy cavalry and enemy infantry. They were so called because they were armed with a pike, a long spear, in theory 18 feet in length, but often cut down to some 16 feet by the pikemen to make them slightly more manageable. Deployed in dense bodies of men to form a hedge of pikes to hold off enemy cavalrymen or infantry. One pikeman on his own was no use to anyone. A body of pikemen together could be a formidable opponent. In principle, the pikeman was equipped with a set of armour: the cuirass, a back and breastplate, tassets or thigh plates, a gorget or neck guard, and a pikeman's pot helmet to protect the head. In reality, though, with equipment shortages, most pikemen were lucky to get more than a helmet, and many of them discarded their armour because it was cumbersome on campaign. Pikemen would be formed up in order to protect the musketeers, so would form in the centre of the infantry regiment. Here they could be deployed to hold off enemy infantry or cavalry, whilst the musketeers were vulnerable whilst reloading their weapons. The basic posture of the pikeman was at order, holding the pike with the butt end on the ground, so that it could be easily held even in high winds. Moving up into the shoulder like this was known as putting the pike at the advance. This meant that the pikemen could move around in dense bodies and very close together without the pikes getting tangled up. Putting the pike onto the shoulder was the march posture. The shouldered posture made it easier to carry the pike when marching. If a pikeman came to an obstruction, such as a gateway or perhaps low-hanging trees, he would port his pike, from the French word for a gateway, which meant that he could see exactly where the point of the pike was, but it should ensure that it cleared underneath anything that was hanging down. Main battle posture against other infantry was the charged pike. The pike is lower towards the face of an opponent. Against cavalry, horsemen, the pike would be put down, the butt of it was into the ground, the right foot braced behind it, and the pike levelled down at a 30-degree angle, more or less a horse's chest height. A dense body of pikemen like this formed a hedgehog of pikes in all directions known as a Shieltron. This would of course be used to discourage cavalry from coming too close to the men, and the length of the pike meant that the horses couldn't get in, the horsemen on the back couldn't use their swords against the pikemen or other infantry, and that also the bodies of musketeers on either side of the pikemen could dive underneath and take shelter away from the cavalry. Towards the end of the Civil War, as flintlock muskets became more common, quicker and easier to load, pikemen became less important, and by this point there were perhaps 2, maybe even as many as 4 musketeers for every single pikeman. The pike would still continue to appear on 17th century battlefields, until towards the end of the century it was replaced by the bayonet. Fitted to the end of the musket, the bayonet meant that each infantryman could become a pikeman in his own right, and yet still load and fire his gun into the bargain.